fearless, uncompromising, Catholic.
Translators. Preface. With great pleasure, I wish to provide for you all the English translation of El Zurriago, translated as The Whip by Gabriel García Moreno, who would later become President of Ecuador. This remarkable periodical represents one of the most caustic and fearless examples of political satire in 19th century Latin American journalism. Published in 1855, during a period of intense political turmoil in Ecuador, El Zurriago emerged as a scathing critique of corruption, venality, and moral degradation within the newly independent republic. García Moreno, writing before his rise to the presidency, wielded his pen like the whip of the title, lashing out at the 28 deputies who sold their votes in the Constitutional Convention of Cuenca. The periodical's language is unsparing. It exposes electoral corruption, attacks false patriots who cloaked self-interest in patriotic rhetoric, and decries the abandonment of Republican ideals for personal gain. The articles translated here capture a critical moment in Ecuador's early Republican history, a time when the promises of independence seemed betrayed by those entrusted with building the new nation. García Moreno's voice, furious and uncompromising, speaks to the disappointment of a generation that had hoped the 6th of March Revolution would bring genuine transformation, only to witness in his words, "Liberty become a pure and innocent virgin, abandoned to the outrages of brutal libertines." This translation makes accessible to English readers a vital primary source for understanding not only Ecuadorian political culture, but also the broader challenges facing Latin American republics in their formative decades. How could newly independent nations prevent democracy from degenerating into oligarchic corruption? How could they balance stability with liberty? These questions, posed with such urgency in El Zurriago, remain relevant today. Introduction. Tired of seeing and silently suffering so many iniquitous actions which multiply each day, due to lack of appropriate censure, we have resolved to raise the whip, with the principal object of punishing so many false patriots, so many perverse liberals, so many deputies without honor, so many employees without shame, so many charlatan petitioners, and so many deceitful rogues. Whoever is not included in any of the preceding classes has nothing to fear from us. We shall extol merit and good conduct. We shall excuse errors accompanied by good faith, and we shall respect weakness and misfortune, while we shall combat head-on vice, made great and wickedness elevated, venality and nepotism, political and religious hypocrisy, adulation, baseness, and perfidy. The whip shall strike its blows with justice and impartiality, and like lightning, it shall spare the humble shrub and strike the proud palm. Formidable enemies are going to oppose us, ferocious enemies who will want to lead us to the scaffold to avenge their dishonor upon us. But we shall have in our favor public opinion, which has already condemned the same adversaries whom we now combat. We do not belong to any of the parties or any of the factions. We are neither janissaries nor demagogues, nor do we figure in the sad pantheon where aspiration without position and mocked ambition lie. Independent, just and free from fear and hope, we shall tell everyone the truth, and we shall make the whip the defender of the good, and the hatred and terror of the wicked. March 18th, 1846. Warning. For many days I have wrestled with the dangerous temptation to bring this satire to light, composed during the time when the ominous convention of Cuenca broke all dikes of honor and decency, giving an example of the most scandalous finality. I need not warn my readers that, in saying Convention of Cuenca, I take the whole for the part, and that I address myself uniquely to the corrupted majority, to the 28 deputies who purchased positions with their own dishonor and with the probable ruin of their country. I yielded at last to the desire to publish this poetic essay, imperfect, incorrect, and even despicable, if one wishes, but full of justice and truth, as it was inspired by the profound sentiment of indignation that the spectacle of present perversity and the foreseeing of evils to come excited in me. Perhaps this sketch would have remained buried with many others in the darkness of oblivion, if I did not believe it indispensable to restrain the unbridling of the passions, applying to them a bitter but suitable remedy, if I did not fear the pernicious influence that the prostitution of many who prided themselves on being liberals could have on youth, and if it did not seem necessary to me to punish with rigor those who transgressed without shame. Not even a year ago, usurped reputations shone in our political horizon. Today, excepting very few, those stars have descended into the mire, where the people contemplate them with laughter. How many rose up like vultures to better distinguish their prey, and plunged down to devour it, when destiny placed it within their talons? See if not the such and such is now gathering the abundant fruits of their fruitful vote. Now then, since they have received the reward of their infamy, let them also receive a minimal part of their punishment in the accents of my muse, which prepares itself to be the scourge of their venality and vileness. Effects of El Zurriago. Our first issue has appeared and has caused an indescribable sensation, an electric shock in the entire society. The people who, submerged in profound affliction, have seen their flattering hopes evaporate. The people, this blind and docile being that always allows itself to be dazzled with vain promises, by those who aspire to greatness, this divinity that is invoked in danger, and forgotten and outraged when believed useless. The people, we say, have trembled with joy upon seeing that they still have friends to console them, brothers to defend them, and sons to avenge them. For them, the whip has been a breath of life communicated to a field of death, a cry of salvation launched by an angel in the eternal prisons. They have read our newspaper, unable to hide their contentment from the very eyes of the traitors who sold them. They have recited our verses with pleasure, and they have applauded and encouraged us. Upon hearing the crack of the whip, they have emerged from the gloomy stupor to which they had been reduced by the shameful apostasy of the apostles of liberty, the venality of the simoniacal patriots, and the establishment of the conventional traffickers. It suffices for now to have awakened them. In the next issue we shall indicate the path they must follow, removed from the vacillations of anarchy, so that they may once again avoid being the prey of a flock of carnivorous birds. Entirely contrary effects have we observed in those who have suffered our blows, in those who thought to enjoy the purchased positions, without anyone daring to raise their voice to censure their abysmal conduct. Indignant at finding so well portrayed in printed characters the hidden dealings of the election, they have directed, now against the whip, now against the supposed editors, furious attacks and unfounded charges that shall easily be dispelled. Some have cried out that it is an immoral paper, with no other object than to wound malignantly and dishonor with calumnies men worthy of public esteem. Others have painted it as the monstrous production of discord and the spirit of evil, and all have invoked against it the action of authority and the vengeance of the law. This is what they have said, and this is precisely what they should not have said, in order not to expose themselves to the second discharge. A writing is not immoral because it reveals immoral but true acts, just as a judge is not a delinquent because he judges and punishes crimes. Immorality does not reside in the punishment, but in the crime and in the villain who perpetrates it. Now then, the whip is the punishment, the crime, the scandalous sale of votes, the villains, the 28 who prevaricated. Our object, as we expressed in the previous issue, is to combat vice made great and wickedness, elevated venality and nepotism, political and religious hypocrisy, adulation, baseness and perfidy. But it has never been to vomit calumnies foreign to our rigid character and friend of truth. In the continuation of this article, it will be seen whether our assertions have been calumnious or not, and whether it is possible to dishonor men without honor and without shame. Equally futile is the second charge that has been made against us, of having evoked the serpents of discord, since no one has failed to recognize that our tendency is to prevent the shameful negotiations of Cuenca from being repeated in the future, and to prevent the first magistracy from being put up for auction again. Anarchy feeds on vices and disorder, and therefore one cannot brand as anarchic he who attempts to repress the former and see that the latter is chained, he who has lifted the tombstone that covered the conventional cesspool, so that fresh air may correct and purify it. The followers of the spirit of evil, the abettors of civil dissensions, are the deputies who betray public trust, those who prostitute their duties and their conscience, those who crawl like reptiles to assault positions, those who sacrifice the hopes of national progress to the project of their particular aggrandizement. Less cautious than the other prevaricators, and bolder because of the mask of hypocrisy with which he covers himself, Father N has published his vindication, reduced in substance to saying that our newspaper does not deserve credit for lacking proofs and appearing anonymously. A. We believed it unnecessary in the previous issue to expose the reasons on which we relied, because we did nothing more than repeat in public the same thing that the public had said, and it was the public that should answer for what we affirmed. However, the mathematician of the sacred family will reply to us that the public believes without discernment whatever it hears, and that, like paper, it receives in equal measure truth and imposture. But this reply, sometimes true unfortunately, cannot serve him on the present occasion, in which an infinity of persons were in Cuenca eyewitnesses to the traffic in positions, in which a considerable number of attendees in the gallery heard Mr. Moncayo denounce, in the very bosom of the convention, the offer of a ministry that, in exchange for his vote, the current president made to him in writing, and in which each of the 13 was attempted to be won over with magnificent promises. There is more. Long before the sessions ended, the public knew which positions were mortgaged to most of the 28. Positions that they occupy today, without being ashamed to see the predictions of the vulgar fulfilled. Here are the proofs we give, to Reverend N, to the astute, sanctimonious one, who applies to himself the epithet of fanatic, in the absurd sense of not being anti-Catholic undoubtedly to make us appear with the character of impious. Since we speak in Castilian, we give words no other value than what they have in the peninsula, and if we call him fanatical, it is because he belongs to the number of those who wish to cultivate with the scimitar of Mohammed the peaceful heritage of the gospel. It causes us admiration that the most reverend father judges the whip unworthy of credit for having omitted the name of the printer and that of the place where it was printed. An involuntary oversight, already corrected in this issue, could not serve as a weak argument, nor can it be affirmed that a writing is calumnious by the mere fact of appearing anonymous. Diogenes' lantern contains more truths, despite being anonymous, than all the columns of the insipid Gazette. Of the same sort as the previous one are two other reasons, which he presents as conclusive, when from them can only be concluded the lack of reason and means of defense. The monkish writer believed himself covered, for having been the author of the obstacle imposed on the election of the first magistrate, and because the conventional negotiating majority did not consent that the president of the chamber, who was one of the 13, take charge of the presidency of the state. The first difficulty is easily resolved, considering that our reverend mathematician did not manage to foresee the obstacles that, without realizing it, he himself opposed to his candidate, when long before the election he proposed that it be done by 2/3 of deputies, and the second is even more easily overcome. For what could be simpler than the opposition of the treasonous deputies to having occupied the throne, one who had offered them no position, and to having the other with whom the remuneration was stipulated be deceived? If the president of the chamber had been president of the Republic, goodbye to Quevedo's rectorship, goodbye to Bustamante's ministry, goodbye to Albuja's chief clerkship, goodbye to Rodriguez's magistracy, goodbye to Galecio's administration, goodbye to Angulo's mint, goodbye to Montalvo's directorship, goodbye to Borgia's judgeship, goodbye to the positions of the 28, goodbye to those of brothers, friends, and relatives. To convince us of his disinterest, FRN tells us that he renounced a position of greater importance and profit, and that he accepted the one he now has, because he did not believe he should obstinately refuse to serve in any position, at least out of gratitude. Upon reading such a gracious confession, it was impossible for us to contain our laughter, for we had not recognized this new way of being disinterested, renouncing a position of greater income that did not suit him, and accepting another of lesser salary, but more suited to his other occupations. It is amusing that the tonsured deputy, only in order not to seem obstinate, so that he would not be believed stubborn and headstrong, said yes with the timidity and moderation of a maiden in the nuptial ceremony. For him it would have been worse than death to be stubborn, bearing the ugly mark of ingratitude, and so he found no other recourse than to resign himself to accepting, humbly submitting to the inscrutable decrees of Providence. This is precisely what has happened to the other aspirants, to these people docile by essence, who detest stubbornness and obstinacy as defects unworthy of the courtesy with which one should treat the amiable revenues. And what will be the purpose for which the mathematical friar informs us that several of the 13 are employed? Has he perhaps wanted to accuse them of versatility and inconsistency, nothing more distant from truth and justice, nothing more incompatible with the dignity of those deputies who gloriously resisted the assaults of corruption? If some of them are performing governmental tasks, it has been because the administration, not finding among those of the electoral faction capable men with which to fill all the posts, has been obliged to render a public homage to merit and capacity, elevating them with entreaties to the rank they deserve. If some of them have accepted, it has been from the desire to contribute something to extracting the country from the lamentable state in which it finds itself. It has been because they knew well that they would be responsible before the fatherland for the disastrous consequences that their refusal would drag. And it has been, finally, to stop the torrent of evil and prepare the path of good. We have purposely left for this place the last lash of the whip that the most Reverend N must suffer from our hands. In nothing has he better manifested his flattering and basely servile character than in the undeserved and pompous eulogy he makes of the one to whom he sold his conscience. Let us grant him gratuitously that he voted for an energetic, active, intelligent man, and friend of success, for a man of diligent and correct conduct, circumspect in the handling of public business, and careful to conform his life with his Christian belief, according to the expression of his hypocritical panegyrist. Let us grant him more, that he voted for the only one worthy of sitting beneath the throne. And does he think by this to justify himself for having prostituted himself to sordid interest? Does the judge who grants justice for money cease to be culpable? Or the priest who traffics with the gifts of heaven, to procure the common happiness, with no other aims than to fulfill one's duty, is proper to the true republican, but to do good for the power of gold is only proper to depraved and corrupt souls? Returning now to examine carefully the praises he lavishes on his Lord, we will find that, truth consulted, they can only be understood in an ironic sense, in which, for example, life conforming to Christian belief is taken for sacrilegious abuse of the means of salvation. This is the one whom N and his accomplices believe they have honored with their votes, as if honor could result from vice, and as if they could give what they do not even know. Full of audacity, the prudish friar has asked us for facts that belie the reputation of the 28, although more properly he should have asked for facts that confirm it. We do not know if the inexcusable infraction of the Constitution we have just sworn, the contempt for judicial formalities, and the violation of guarantees will satisfy him. We are ignorant whether perjury and arbitrariness united with cunning and hypocrisy will seem sufficient to him. Later, we shall speak at length about the recent events to which we refer here. We shall end this article by calling our readers' attention to the genuine meaning of the word sagacity, very appropriate to characterize an astute and crafty subject, with which the courtier monk thought to flatter proud power. Without knowing it, he has spoken the truth, for having something of a child and much of a madman, and wanting to incense his idol, he has thrown in his face a coal from the censer. April 18th, 1846. Political arithmetic. Arithmetic is without contradiction the primordial basis of exact knowledge, the first division of the mathematical scale, the most usual science in the world, and the most necessary in order not to get lost in the labyrinth of life. Its applications are increasingly varied and extensive. Arithmetic, perpetual guide of base interest, has taken possession of all the affections of the heart, of all the bonds of society, and has extended its despotic dominion from the sumptuous palace to the humble cabin, from the friar's cell to the coquette's dwelling, from the Pharisee N to the publican M, from the cunning one of Congo to the braggart of Cataquachi. Its empire has for limits the limits of the universe, for vassals mankind, for duration eternity. It dictates its oracles in the temple of Pinto to the infinite multitude of its proselytes. It influences efficaciously the judgments of justice. It gives laws to conscience, and it has infallible maxims for all kinds of matters. Friendship, sweet friendship, does not pour out its consolations without first consulting the rule of proportion. Love does not shoot its arrows without first studying the Pythagorean table, and even gratitude changes signers' suits to obtain better results. Society today is the great blackboard on which each one traces more or less legible characters, forms more or less complicated calculations, and by dint of committing errors, acquires more skill and experience. Merchants dedicate themselves to sums. Certain employees serve as subtrahend in the productive subtraction. Women multiply with mastery. And lawyers, notaries, and attorneys are capable of dividing heaven itself. Universal is without doubt the use that is made, in these times, of the portentous science of numbers. Nevertheless, in politics, is where its applications present themselves under a most admirable aspect. Let us rapidly run through the governmental conventional list, and we shall find here a sagacious smuggler, skilled in the secrets of fractions, most able in the rule of wills, and famous inventor of the new operation of converting gold and positions into votes. There we shall see N adjusting oaths to the rule of interest, tenth racking his brains in decimal computations, the sullen Y working diligently to make 0 a significant figure, and the foolish Z struggling in vain to comprehend the digits of the date. Do you want more? In view of so many arithmetical advances, who will dare say that Ecuador remains stationary without taking a single step on the path that the century traverses? We have advanced by giant leaps in the career of deprivation. We have exhausted all humiliations, all basenesses, and we have not left even one vile action to be invented by following generations. These are the bitter fruits that the tree of liberty has produced. These the sad realities that have dissipated the dreams of the 6th of March, brilliant dawn of a disastrous and somber day. Let it not be believed that we blame liberty. No, we blame only those who abuse it to satisfy petty passions. Among us, liberty has been a pure and innocent virgin, abandoned to the outrages of brutal libertines, a beautiful flower, stained with corrupt mud, a perfume adulterated among fetid vapors. Attempted reaction. Many and varied events have fixed public attention since a fortunate chance led to the discovery, in Ibarra, of the military conspiracy, which was going to bury Ecuador beneath its ruins. Despite the necessity that exists in such circumstances to inform the nation about the true state of things, the periodical press has continued to maintain a profound silence, and the ministerial one has only produced the pompous proclamation of the president, drafted with high-sounding words and in Oriental style, and suitable, at most, for stunning ears unaccustomed to such horrible phrases. What is amusing is that this model of Chinese eloquence informs us of the same thing we already knew, omitting to instruct us on the substance of the matter, that is, on the data resulting from the preliminary investigation. To express our opinion, we shall take the series of events from the accursed convention, primary source of all the evils that still threaten us. Scarcely had the colossus of Puerto Cabello been cast from our shores, and scarcely had Ecuador, free from his oppression, begun to constitute itself, when the Florian party also began to raise its head, and to prepare the reaction that in Cuenca was going to drown the provisional government in blood. The plot discovered in time, the government was authorized to expel from the country those who disturbed its repose, but through an inexplicable weakness, it neglected to cleanse the republic of the plague that infected it, and limited itself to transferring a few troublemakers from this to that province, allowing them subsequently to return to their former domicile. Anyone who had not lacked common sense would have foreseen that the fire would revive from the sparks that were imprudently left, that the contagion would revive through the breath of the infected. This first imprudence committed, the convention took it upon itself to make the second, when it left without means of existence a multitude of men who had made arms their exclusive profession, and who suddenly found themselves tormented by indigence. We do not accuse the convention for having disarmed our enemies. No, it took a correct step in taking the sword from the parricidal hand to place it in one that offered confidence and security, but in doing this it did only half of what it should have. The convention could not forget that those soldiers whom it abandoned without sustenance would always be ready to follow the counsels of desperation, and to seek in tumults the means of freeing themselves from hunger or from life. It could not fail to recognize that the victims of misery would be the instruments of anarchy, and that, in the most favorable case, those who had been left without lances would take up the highwayman's saber and the assassin's dagger. It should, consequently, have either provided for their sustenance, or thrown them from the country, or placed them in a place where they would not have been formidable, and, nevertheless, nothing was thought of, because then what mattered was buying votes and securing the election to rise to the position that corresponded to merit and knowledge. They hurled the stone without calculating its descent. They released a tiger without preventing its ravages, absorbed solely in sowing votes to harvest positions. This is not all. To facilitate the means of disruption for those who were secretly plotting a vast plan of conspiracy, the government has neglected to settle amicably the differences with New Granada, differences that long ago would have been arranged if there had been sincere will to arrange them. The administration of the ferocious Mosquera, insidious and deceitful by character, has provoked the reaction, has offered support to the vanquished, and avoiding the noise of combat, has waged against us a silent war, more harmful than what it could wage in open field. If the causes for complaint had been cut at the root by reasonable and conciliatory means, if the foolish pretensions of giving unnecessary asylum to one who bears the curse of Cain upon his forehead had been abandoned, we would not be suffering the disastrous consequences of a blockade. Commerce would not have expired, revenues would not have been uselessly consumed, and the Florians would not have counted on a powerful ally. With such means of acting, with so many probabilities of triumph, it was impossible that an insurrection would not be prepared, suggested by interest, fomented by desperation, and fed by vengeance. It was impossible that the serpent, terrified but not killed by the blows of Elvira, would not return from its stupor more arrogant and more enraged. By a special protection of Providence, the plot was discovered in time, and the arm was detained when with its finger it was pointing out the victim. But even here, the conduct of the government is completely reprehensible. Instead of hastening the discovery of the entire revolutionary plan, it has been entertained in hearing the intrigues of the courtiers. Instead of respecting the guarantees, it has openly violated them, and instead of saving the Constitution by observing it, it has infringed it, and it would have thrown it into the flames if there had not been in the ministry an energetic voice that courageously defended the law of laws. No one is unaware that many persons have been imprisoned in the capital, 8, 15, and 20 days, without having been given, within 24 hours, the copy of the arrest order required by Article 111 of the Constitution. No one is unaware that they have not been placed, within 48 hours, at the disposal of the competent judge, as Article 74 requires. And everyone knows that more than 30 capitulated officers, for no other reason than their misfortune, were locked in a prison, where hunger would have consumed them, if the humane sentiments of General Madrid and of some compassionate ladies had not provided them the sustenance they needed. And yet, he who condemns to die of misery men, perhaps innocent, dares to kneel at the foot of the altars, to insult with his sacrilegious lips the God-protector of innocence and terrible avenger of hypocrisy. When we set our eyes on the dismal picture of past, present, and future evils, when we think that the venality and corruption of the 28 have destroyed the hopes of progress and improvements, and when we see that a revolution that conceals vast ramifications still threatens us, and that a war without object is going to be the result of a criminal election, pain and indignation seize our breast. We invoke the curses of heaven and the execration of the ages against the authors of our misfortunes. And we would wish that our pen were the sword of the avenging angel to erase names unworthy of being found in the book of life. In our judgment, only one remedy remains which, though slow, is sure, and of which we are going to speak in the following article. We promised in number 2 to indicate to the people the path they must follow, remove from the vacillations of anarchy, so that they may once again avoid being the prey of a flock of carnivorous birds. To fulfill this purpose is not an attempt beyond our strength, for a little common sense suffices, so that anyone might conceive the ideas that we are going to develop. Among us, the primary cause, the principal origin of public misfortunes has existed in the congresses, formed, almost in their entirety, of degraded men whom tyranny recruited from the ranks of vice and ignorance. Recall, if not all, the assemblies that have borne that name, and not a single one will be found that has done any good or corrected any evil. Not a single one that has not served, except that of 41, as a support for ambition and a shield for despotism. The cause being known, it is necessary to destroy it in order to free ourselves from its effects, that is to say, that we must work so that persons of enlightenment, of talent, and above all of probity may discharge the elevated functions of legislators, closing the doors of the chambers to those who desire to have a vote, in order to put it up for sale. Some believe that the scandalous scenes of Cuenca will not be repeated, because the Constitution prohibits representatives and senators from receiving, during the performance of their office, any employment from the executive that is subject to his free appointment and removal. But this is an apparent and useless restraint, good at most for deluding the credulous people, but not those who reason so as not to be deceived. The reason is clear when the election of president is made, which is the vital question with which Ecuadorian legislatures deal. Half of the members who elect leave office, the other half continuing for 2 more years, as the Constitution has established. The first half, consequently, not being included in the constitutional prohibition, can follow without obstacle the path of the 28 traffickers, transferring themselves from the tribune to the office, and the second half can also sell its vote and receive the price after 2 years, a time when there is no obstacle to prevent it. Moreover, the accepted positions are very limited in number, because only the secretariats of state and the treasury employments, attributions 7 and 8% of Article 70, are subject to free removal by the executive power, and therefore the only ones that it is not permitted to confer upon deputies, while they retain the character of such. The remaining political, military, and ecclesiastical employments being left, to be given in exchange for the votes needed to attain the presidency. Of what use is that insufficient prohibition, which we have so rightly qualified as useless? Perhaps only a ministry or a treasury position is capable of inducing someone to commit an infamy. It is not surprising that the Constitution contains this and many other gaps and defects, for it has been the product of stupidity multiplied by extravagance. Consider, on the other hand, that those who form the national representation have friends and relatives whom they seek to place among the government's agents, providing them with a lucrative accommodation. To neutralize so many elements of corruption, elect as legislators independent, honest, and truly patriotic men. Take care to tear the mask from the liberals of convenience, and do not forget what has been the conduct of all those who, under the cover of a fictitious patriotism, concealed vile projects of ambition and greed. But in vain would one wish to have good deputies, if the electors are what they have always been, passive instruments of another's will, without their own reason or conscience, and ready to condescend to whoever commands in order to realize their small pretensions. Just as in vain would we desire the electors to be what they should be, if all good citizens do not unite their efforts to counteract the sinister influence of the circle of base seekers who, in the capital, in Guayaquil, and in other points of the Republic, work shamelessly to provide worthy successors to the 28, without shame. In the field of elections is planted the tree of good and evil, from which through carelessness we shall reap abundant fruits of malediction. Let disinterest and good sense triumph in the elections, and the happiness of the fatherland is assured. Let office-seeking triumph on the contrary, and all is lost, even national honor. If the latter occurs, we shall combat with the whip the electors and deputies unworthy of exercising such important functions, and we shall make them suffer punishments more painful than those applied to the last prevaricators. We give nor ask for quarter, nor do we ever pardon those who have contributed, or contribute afterward, to prolonging the evils and misery that overwhelm us. Let the weak electors and the perverse deputies tremble. Woe to them if the whip discharges upon them its enraged, avenging blows. Historical sketch. The eve of the election. The eve of the great day had finally arrived, the day on which this important problem was to be resolved. Will Ecuador have a just, wise, and progressive government? Or will it be the vile merchandise that corruption consigns to infamous hypocrisy? It was difficult to decide this question before the combat began between vice and virtue, venality and disinterest, perfidy and patriotism. The convention was in truth a monstrous sphinx that had, like that of Thebes, a human voice, the head and hands of a maiden, the claws of a lion, the body of a dog, and the wings of a vulture, and we can even add the tonsure of a friar, the cassock of a clergyman, and the tail of an ass, but nevertheless, there were hopes that the prophetic voice of Rocafuerte and of the few deputies of probity would make the shameless mob retreat, which advanced with audacity to place in the urn the vote they had sold. The greatest unease and agitation reigned in the spirit of those who expected from the election the promised reward. At times tormented by the doubtfulness of the contest and exasperated by the fear of defeat, they cursed the austere Republicans, against whom promises and threats had been fruitless. At times they wished to divine who would obtain victory, to vote for him, whoever he might be, provided he assured them positions, and at times supposing themselves vanquished, they meditated new baseness to achieve, by the path of dishonor, what fortune might perhaps deny them. Moved by the hidden interest of knowing thoroughly the forces of their party, they directed themselves simultaneously to the dwelling of, where, as if they had been summoned at the same time, almost all found themselves gathered at the same hour. The dejected Jay presented himself first at the threshold, followed by many of his friends and companions, his face pale, his body small and consumed, his eyes sparkling with fury and insults stumbling over his yellowish lips, those that came out and those about to come out. Jay was like the reprobate, oppressed beneath the crushing weight of spite and desperation. Accustomed for a long time to dissimulating his emotions in forensic trickery, he suddenly changed the expression of his countenance, and affecting the joviality of a schoolboy and the mad gaiety of a prostitute, he directed flattering words to the austere man we are about to describe. Gravely seated in a comfortable armchair, covered with a long purple-colored robe and wearing an executioner's cap that could be seen through the lenses of spectacles, a serious personage who had the aspect of Marius, the heart of Sulla, and entrails of rock. His features were tinged with the color of evening, when the shadows of night rise. His ugly mouth let escape few and sententious words, and his severe countenance already presaged the proximity of triumph. "Have you spoken with O?" he said, while shaking the hand of the ridiculous mannequin who had just greeted him, who sad and disconsolate answered, "Everything has been done, and he resists everything. He prefers to remain a poor priest rather than stain his name, as he says, with a degrading and dishonorable act." "So much the worse for him," replied the personage with the cap. "Some day I will make him repent, though late." At this instant, with a contrite and devout air, entered Father A, the living image of the famous hermit Garifanto, so well painted by the sharp wit of Tom de Bourguillos. "Blessed be God," he exclaimed upon sitting down. "He and his merciful mother have opened the door we least expected. X has sworn as successor of the apostles that he will lend his vote, provided that the matter we know of is not forgotten, and positions are distributed to certain individuals of his family. I have offered it, and we have agreed that, after some votes in which he will vote for others, he will vote finally for your excellency, who with divine blessing will tomorrow be president. Deo gratias," said upon entering a ragged and greasy abbot with a cracked and nasal voice, and with his head tangled in 1,000 bandages that threw off a rancid and disagreeable odor. Highly offensive to the nostrils, it was the madman Z, for fool's a wise man. For the wise a fool, very good for the foolish, and very foolish for the good. "I have worked much," he added, "but in vain. What are we to do? They want neither ministries, nor governorships, nor anything. Finally, I have told them consummatum est, I have given them absolution, and as penance I have commanded that those simpletons who do not wish to penetrate into the sanctuary of positions remain as laymen. Upon taking my leave, I have added to them ait missa est, so that they think that in the election there is no need of them, and the rogues have laughed and mocked me to my face. No matter qui votum sum tibi non dederet, anathema sit, that is to say, responded the austere man in the purple robe, that we count on 27% for certain. And what? Can we not find one more to complete the required number? "Providence, sir," said A, with his body immobile as a post, and his eyes fixed on the ground. "Providence, which cares even for the little worms of the earth, will cause one of the 14 to pass to a better life in heaven, leaving us free of a great obstacle. Or at the least will cause him to prefer a small position that provides him the means to live as a Christian, without offending God, nor the holy priests, nor our beloved neighbors." Containing a boisterous guffaw, B interrupted him, and addressing himself with respect to the ugly man, inspired, he spoke to him in this manner. "A thing extremely easy it seems to me to obtain the vote that is needed, provided it is sought with the tact and skill that is due. The expert soldier who attacks a fortification at first sight impregnable examines it first with attention, reconnoiters it carefully, and when he discovers the side that weakens, he directs against it a formidable battery until the cannon opens for him among the ruins the door of victory. Here is traced the path that must be followed. If we wish to triumph in the electoral contest, let us discover the weak one among our adversaries, let us attack him with vigor, and I do not doubt, sir, we shall triumph. But how to divine who is this weak enemy, how to know the manner of combating him? Weakness supposes nothing other than the scarcity of base, or the lack of support, and the base of man consists only in those members that prevent him from falling and help him to sustain himself. Consequently, the weak deputy of the opposing camp is he who, deprived of one of his legs, cannot maintain himself firm. Is he who needs to grasp something to preserve his equilibrium. The mode of attacking him is fortunately usual and known. Gold today is the tyrannical master of men, and the powerful arbiter of the world. It obscures with its dazzling brilliance the scarce and tremulous light of reason, and it is the star that guides the interested conscience and venal justice. Give, then, to that half-deputy the complement of gold that completes him, give him a staff of gold to sustain him, a pen of gold to sign the sold vote, and you will see him enclose shame and honor in the purse of money that is handed to him. A general murmur applauded the impudent prediction of the sagacious augur, and a smile of approbation widened the swollen lips of the pretender to the throne. To encourage more the henchmen who surrounded him, he began to recall to each one the shameful conspiracy by which they found themselves united, and the positions he had prepared for them if a happy success crowned their efforts. Far from blushing upon hearing spoken of in so clear a manner the agreed price, they had the unheard-of audacity to indicate the posts they believed suited them better than those designated, in imitation of the intelligent merchant who selects in the factory the most esteemed goods, from which he expects to draw greater profits. Then those who had lost courage recovered it, and prepared themselves cheerfully to enter the arena with valor. Then they returned to flatter themselves with the beautiful illusions of an enchanted future, which for them depends on a copious income that feeds them in the bosom of idleness. Then they insolently mocked the venerable names of country and liberty, and the veil of appearances torn, they allowed a glimpse of the perversity of their heart, more horrible in its frightful nakedness. Thus, in the disorder of noisy debauchery, the evildoer acquires new forces to stain himself with new crimes, and animated by culpable hopes descends each day with greater rapidity into the chasm of perdition, until touching at last the horrific bottom of the tomb. Who are the editors of El Zurriago? At every moment we hear asked with utmost interest about the true editors of this periodical, which has gathered many applauses and not a few curses. We do not wish to fail to satisfy the curiosity of our friends, and above all, we wish to reveal ourselves to our enemies, so that they may employ against us the means of vengeance at their disposal, if indeed they can reach us with their impotent shots. The editors of El Zurriago are 28, namely, they are the same actors of the conventional farce, in which white became black, the ember turned to coal, and the phoenix appeared as a crow. Let it not be said that this is a joke or a piece of trickery, for whoever wishes to convince himself of the stated truth need only read the following lines. What does El Zurriago contain? The revelation of the criminal and indecent conduct of 28 shameless men, and a part of their deserved punishment. More clearly, it contains nothing other than the summary of what they did in Cuenca, and the expression of the judgment pronounced against them by the people indignant at their insolent venality. Now we ask, who are the true editors, those who compiled the facts, or those who translated them into common terms? Is it not said that the one who dictates the letter writes it, even though another may be the one who traces the characters? And are not the 28 the ones who have dictated El Zurriago, and we the ones who have written in this very bad handwriting? Consequently, it is undoubted that they are the sole editors, without our having done more than the innocent office of scribes. They are the ones the police should pursue to make them repent of the cursed temptation to become writers, and they are the ones who should be very grateful to us, because we have published their history without demanding any payment whatsoever. Defense of El Zurriago. Displeased with our newspaper, El 6 de Marzo 1 has reappeared, after a prolonged lethargy in which, from time to time, it has uttered few vague and interrupted words. A production worthy of the eloquent pen of its author, sonorous echo of the canticles of triumph, vigorous laurel born amid the fire of combat, it justly deserved the august name of a forever glorious day. It is regrettable that the misunderstanding of our first two issues has led it to express against us a rash and undeserved judgment. Supposing in us intentions that we condemn and tendencies that we combat, it is regrettable that, despite its French urbanity, it has treated us with an excessive acrimony, which reveals the desire that we use against it lawful reprisals, and that we engage in a polemic that could be extremely painful for it. It is regrettable that it obliges us to take up the shield and to return blow for blow, to return offense for offense, without having on our part any other motive than the ardent zeal that animates us for the happiness of the fatherland. To say that the language of our press is not only a crime, but a cowardice, giving as reason that truth, in order to shine, does not hide in darkness, nor cover itself with a mask, nor take advantage of the hour of adversity, is to utter a calumny and present as proof a sophism in harmonious phrases. It would be a crime to aim the shots of slander against property. It would be a crime to invoke patriotism against the fatherland, liberty against its results, the memories of the revolution against its future. It would be a crime to play with the noblest passions, with the most elevated sentiments, with the most liberal ideas, so that the evil passions unleashed might consummate their work of rapine and blood amid the rubble. But it is not a crime, but a virtue, to pursue vice and chastise the vicious, so that scenes of scandal and deprivation may not be reproduced. It is not a crime, but a virtue, to publish the secret intrigues of treasonous deputies, so that in the future the people may be more cautious in choosing the depositaries of their trust. It is not a crime, but a virtue, to hurl against the simoniacal liberals terrible but just imprecations, to curse the monster of evil and overwhelm it under the weight of execration. It will be cowardice not to come forward when one enjoys guarantees, when violence is contained by justice, or when force is restrained by force. But he is not a coward who speaks aloud bitter truths, truths that before power are never uttered with impunity. He is not a coward who, compromising his security and perhaps his life, expects only doubtful improvements and certain persecutions. He is not a coward who writes without fear, by virtue of intimate convictions, and not for calculation, profit, or reward. Answer us, writer of El Se de Marzo, who manifests cowardice, you who write because they pay you, and because you do not fear, or we who write while paying, and exposing ourselves to the fury of vengeance. Who manifests cowardice, he who, in a safe place, listens to the counsels of timid prudence, or he who, for love of the fatherland, confronts dangers with serene brow. We have not taken advantage of the hour of adversity. We have not wished to add anguish to tribulation, for we raised our voice against the corruption of the 28, when they were lulled by the cheers of triumph, when it seemed that they had nothing to fear, that nothing remained for them to desire, in order to enjoy tranquilly the price of their infamy. Seeing the work of iniquity consummated, fearing the disastrous consequences of a criminal election, and finding ourselves surrounded by obstacles and dangers, by abysses and precipices, we undertook the risky task of awakening the deadened enthusiasm of the people, so that they might prepare, through recent elections, and not through revolts or disorders, the path that one day must lead us to the longed-for prosperity. But, when an insidious and treacherous government attempted to make war on Ecuador, the whip redoubled its energy, and struck strong blows upon the perverse who had provoked its terrible wrath, because far from harboring ambiguous opinions, it recognizes as its sole motto, to the enemies of the fatherland, hatred, war, and malediction. We do not care if the name of our newspaper is believed to be infamous for representing a brutal instrument of punishment. Indeed, it brings infamy to the malefactors condemned to suffer it, but not to those who employ it to restrain the proselytes of crime, in the same way that the shameful scaffold brings infamy to him who expiates his crimes upon it, without harming the judge who justly condemned the delinquent. It will certainly not be a foreigner who can give us lessons in patriotism, to us who have given some proofs of being true patriots and detached from interested motives. If war had erupted, we would have obeyed the sacred voice of the fatherland, and we would have flown to its defense, while the traffickers in employments, the patriots of convenience, would have taken refuge, as before, in the darkness, from which they would have emerged in peace to reap the fruits of victory. We would have seen that cowardice is well allied with venality, fear with dishonor, and terror with baseness. Meanwhile, those who truly love the unfortunate country that saw them born would have fearlessly defended national honor. They would have presented themselves intrepidly to give and receive death. They would have triumphed without doubt, because valor is omnipotent when from honor it receives its vigor, from justice its sword, and from patriotism its impetus. Hours of patriotism. The fact is that there are hours for everything, although here most of them are for nothing. When we say that there are hours for everything, we mean to express that there are hours for everything bad, for everything disagreeable, and when we assert that most of them are for nothing, it should be added for nothing, that can make this monotonous and vegetable existence pleasant and smiling, which I don't know why we Ecuadorians call life. Among the hours placed under the influence of a malign star, the worst, without contradiction, are those in which we feel those raptures of patriotic spirit, those impulses of liberalism, before which it seems to us that ignoble passions and petty interests must prostrate themselves. These are hours of positive discomfort, because then we cannot tolerate the baseness of one, the perfidy of another, the treachery of this one, nor the corruption of that one. Then the partiality of the disciples of Astrea irritates us, the ineptitude of the employees, and the lack of judgment of the heads of misgovernment. The sight of triumphant vice and downtrodden virtue indignates us. The uncertainty of hope torments us, and the aspect of misfortune enrages us. In these ill-fated hours, we ordinarily lose our heads, we compose the world with a breath, and we delight in forming projects more enchanting than the magic gardens of Armida. And now it seems to us that crime in chains cannot extend its devastating hand over the fatherland, that knowledge and justice lead us along a path of prosperity, and that free and industrious citizens occupy the place of a debased generation. Now we touch the pure happiness that enamored imagination presents to us. We see ourselves surrounded by the pleasures of a republican paradise. But suddenly the severe voice of sad experience awakens us, and we tremble upon hearing it, as the assassin trembles when, upon plunging the dagger into the breast of the sleeping victim, he hears the fatal bell of agony resound. This is exactly what we feel whenever we are animated by true patriotism, by this ardent passion, simple and useless, like the first love of candid innocence. But, speaking the truth, not all possess this patriotism, sincere because it is simple, and simple because it is sincere. Many or almost all pretend to have this quality, when through it they hope to realize their calculations of interest, or when at least they wish, like the Gracchi, to gain among the people a pernicious credit. A false patriot is not, like the true one, a being formidable for his sweeping impetus or worthy of pity for his candid outbursts. He is, on the contrary, of complacent nature and accommodated to all factions and all circumstances, of varied and changeable color at the slightest contact with the weakest reagent, of soft and elastic opinions capable of taking all possible forms, and of proper organization to pass from good to evil, from yes to no, from light to darkness. A pseudo-patriot can very well be compared to a forge, in which the empty bellows makes the fire sparkle if desired, or lets it sleep when convenient beneath the ashes. Do you want an example of the true patriot? Search for him throughout the Republic, and you will scarcely find a dozen men worthy of that glorious title. Infinite are those who pretend to assume it, and some of them allege important services, rendered in a dangerous epoch. But how few were those who united purity of intention with the merit of sacrifice? How few those who did not believe that a miserable alms, thrown perhaps with repugnance into the revolutionary ark, was a capital that should yield them each year centuplicated interest. False patriots, on the contrary, are more common than the clouds of insects that a scorching sun raises on our fertile shores. They populate the antechambers of those who command and the doors of the offices, and it can be affirmed, without exaggeration, that there are 10 in each shop and 100 on each corner. As difficult as it is to recognize them, so risky is their feigned friendship. Their amiable and flattering expressions are snares. They set to extract a word or surprise a secret. elements of which they take advantage immediately to rise upon the ruins of their credulous friends. With the intention of giving an exact idea of what this venomous race is worth, we will present two finished models that stand out among those of the same profession as the gigantic summit of Chimborazo towers among the high Andes. Similar to the bat of the fable, which called itself a bird when convenient and a quadruped when it suited it, Commander V has adorned himself at the same time with the insignia of opposing camps, has been and is janissary and liberal, servile and demagogue, and by force of base intrigues has managed to retain the martial cap instead of the ridiculous dunce cap. As a soldier, he has made his career with his agile feet, and he is one of so many stains that the military list contains, composed in great part of erasures and blots. As an employee, he has distinguished himself in intrigue, denunciation, and calumny, and as a private citizen, he has always borne the weight of public execration. Before the 6th of March, he was the go-between of ex-General Flores. In the Revolution, he was alternately traitor to both parties, according as he believed the throne of the usurper firm or vacillating. And when he saw it on the ground, he had the audacity to present as merit his detestable felony. Despite being well known for his perfidious conduct, he serves today as the soul of a framework, gnawed by the devouring tooth of the moth, more skillful, more profound than fifth in the dark science of treachery. The comic Urbina is the personage who represents in himself an entire century of immorality, all the progress of human corruption. For him vices have no mysteries, nor depravity secrets. For him there is no code in the world that has foreseen the limit of his excesses. For him morality and honor are chimeras, laws and constitution lies, country and liberty, nothing or less than nothing. Able disciple of an ingenious preceptor, he recognizes no God but his pleasures, no rules but his brutal libertinism, nor any gospel but the maxims of Machiavelli. Of affected and mimicking manners, of deceitful and treacherous smile, he always carries a blunt sword entwined with a thyrsus, as a significant symbol of his exploits. In the next period, he intends to be president to consummate the work of him who now drags us with rapidity down the slope of our ruin, and he has offered to the stupid A to make him first minister of the productive administration of the taverns. His ambitious pretensions are given fuel and hope by the perverse ones who have plunged us into an abyss of infamy, and in recompense, he has promised them positions more fruitful than those they now possess, as the price of their affront. What would become of us if we saw the mystical crow converted into a voracious vulture, if the consummate hypocrite were succeeded by an unbridled rogue, stained with all the vices that the atmosphere of the Seraglio communicates? July 9th, 1846. Conspiracy discovered. When we affirmed in the third issue that the conspiracy discovered in Ibarra concealed vast ramifications, we flattered ourselves with the hope that so important an indication would not be useless, and that new disturbances would be avoided with the continuous vigilance of the government and the severe punishment of the guilty. We frankly confess that we were mistaken, expecting vigilance from those from whom we should only await abandonment, carelessness, and negligence, and expecting the punishment of the criminals when there were so many hands committed to protecting them. Having lost the most opportune occasion to give the rebels a deserved lesson, anyone who did not lack common sense, anyone, even if he had been as stupid as X, Y, or Z, could foresee that revolutions would succeed one another without intermission, until the Florians succeeded in recovering the enjoyment of the longed-for revenues. 1,000 times it has been repeated that the two motivations that govern man are interest and experience, and the janissaries being so interested in reclaiming the fat positions that they lost to their misfortune, and knowing by experience that they can count on impunity. What is strange about their forging 30 revolutions a month, or 100 or 1,000, if they feel like it? Since for them there are neither laws, nor penalties, nor exile, nor scaffold, they do well to work eagerly to place themselves back in the post from which they were expelled. They do well to destine beforehand to death those who would be an obstacle to the realization of their aims. They do well to offer their accomplices the large sums that robbery and pillage will provide them in the midst of fire and slaughter. Thanks to divine providence, which has taken a fancy to saving us from all dangers, we freed ourselves on June 29th from a terrible military revolution that was going to drown the capital of the state in blood. And that would have thrown us into the claws of anarchy, Many officers and some chiefs have been arrested in consequence. But on one hand, they will remain unpunished like those of Ibarra, and on the other, even if they were punished, it is not enough to teach a lesson to those who serve as agents. If those who draw up the revolutionary plans and tirelessly stir the fire of discord are left undisturbed, it is necessary not to be deceived. If the penalty does not reach the head, if the blow does not wound the trunk, we will never have order or peace, goods so necessary for a poor, weak, and nascent republic. Now, more than ever, one should keep very present the maxim of the vulture, first the eye, to preserve ourselves from the horrendous evils that endless commotions bring, and to free ourselves from the pitiful fate of Mexico and Central America. There will be no lack of some who, through bad intention or foolishness, make charges against El Zurriago for having censured the infractions of the Constitution committed when the project of reaction was discovered, of which we spoke in the cited third issue, and for complaining now that the disturbers of that time have remained without punishment, asking at the same time that not only those who have been seduced be punished, but also the seducers. Nevertheless, there has been no contradiction between what we said in that issue and what we say in this one, because we have always wanted and want the delinquents to be repressed, but that the Constitution and laws be respected, that there be no impunity, but that there also be no despotism, for the very reason that they have committed crimes and the fact is well proven. Why trample the legal dispositions instead of applying them to the guilty? Why violate the fundamental code instead of giving example, never departing from its rigid observance? Why, in short, make justice illegal and give the character of arbitrary to equity itself? These have been and are our principles, and guided by them we have disapproved the ridiculous decree that we will call of the 100 pesos, published no doubt to make people laugh at the imbecile Bustamante, worthy priest of the sullen idol. How true it is that! Well deserves the laughter, and contempt the crow that attempts to be an eagle. Notable event. After having shown how some revolutionaries, with projects of blood and extermination, and instigated by 3 or 4 astute evildoers, would have filled this capital with horror, and covered its soil with cadavers if Providence, before the tardy measures of the government, had not stayed the arm already raised to deliver the fratricidal blow, it remains only for us to speak of a scandalous incident. The revolution discovered, and the blind instruments of it apprehended, what has been the conduct of the government toward these disturbers of the peace. Everyone knows they have been subjected to a trial, in which, by error or malice, the most essential formalities have been omitted, and since the war auditor indicated those irregularities, he has been immediately removed from his position. Here there are 2 notable things. Either the government does not have that foundation of honesty necessary to a certain point in so elevated a post, or it lacks its own will in its dispositions. This latter is nevertheless the truth, as we would prove by authentic confessions, if El Zurriago, for the first time, did not wish to leave certain individuals undisturbed. Passing then, in silence, all that we could say in this respect, and without making mention of some other meritorious patriots, who have also been dismissed from the positions to which they had been called for their constant and dangerous services in service to the fatherland, we assure only that in Dr. Agustin Salazar, an honest and virtuous man, there could not exist even the slightest suspicion of opposition to the just aims of the government, and that his judgment on the guilty would have been inexorable. His removal must therefore be viewed as an inexcusable and arbitrary act. The government that acts thus is a vicious government, is a corrupting government. Punish the perverse by all means, but do not employ equally perverse means, if unfortunately events of equal or graver transcendence were repeated, no longer El Zurriago, but an iron rod will fall upon those traitorous serpents that crawl around the rock of the palace.
Fearless. Uncompromising. Catholic.